For today's business brief, we're joined by Nicki Hutley from Deloitte Access Economics. Nicki, great to see you. Obviously today, all about the reaction to the tariffs, the latest phase of tariffs to be imposed by Donald Trump in the United States.
Yeah, look, obviously this is very concerning for the global outlook. It's one more nail in the coffin, if you like, surrounding the global growth story. Despite Donald Trump's rhetoric, we know that tariffs will ultimately have an adverse impact on the US economy as well as China. So, and in fact, possibly more so as products costs rise, prices rise. That sees demand slow and the economy overall slow. So, with the two biggest economies facing this massive economic headwind, if they cannot get to a resolution shortly, it doesn't bode well for any of us in the medium to longer term.
Now, last week the RBA kept interest rates on hold. We will see wages data this week, which is becoming increasingly important, isn't it?
Look, this is absolutely wages and the labour market. This is what the RBA has said it is focused on, and most particularly, obviously, on the labour market. It will be interesting to see that despite that period of much weaker growth that we have seen of late, we've still had these remarkably strong labour markets. So, has that translated into slightly higher wages? The last average weekly earnings figure, 2.3%. So with the wage price index, is that going to mirror that and perhaps show us, a little bit more strength coming through, particularly when it was thought that the rise in minimum wages last year would start to feed through into other parts of the economy? Or are we seeing more headwinds there and still the failure because of factors such as globalisation to pick up? And so we'll really, depending obviously what happens on Tuesday, then on Thursday we'll be focusing on those labour market results themselves, which will be absolutely critical again for the keys to where the RBA is going in the weeks ahead.
And what did you make of the housing commitment yesterday for first home buyers from the government, matched within hours by Labor, Nicki?
Yeah, look, there's not an awful lot of detail around what they're going to do, but the idea that the government sponsors lenders' mortgage insurance and has a much lower requirement for a deposit is quite concerning, depending on how that works in practice in the market. There are already schemes that exist like this for very low income earners. There's shared equity schemes. Indigenous Business Australia run a very successful home lending program, similarly, where they have very low deposit requirements. So there are successful schemes, but they don't just involve having low deposits. They actually involve having all sorts of other support programs around them, and they're for very, very vulnerable households. If we're just talking more widely about first home buyers, it's hard to see how it will work, and the costs of it could be much more excessive than I think it's about $500 million they're saying, if the market were suddenly to drop, as it has done. Obviously, we're coming to the bottom of this price cycle now, but if you imagine this in place 18 months ago, it would have been very expensive for the government if people only had a 5% buffer on their home loans. And that's, of course, why the RBA APRA are saying, 20% is basically what they're expecting from the banks.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Nicki, that you say that. You say, you'd like to see a bit more detail. What detail are you after? And I guess what detail should Labor have sought before they, within hours, jumped on this policy?
Yeah, well, it's not entirely sure what they're relying on. Some suggestions that it will be akin to what's done in New Zealand, which is not quite just government sponsors everything. There are costs associated with that program as well. So I'd like to know, what exactly which costs will be borne by whom? Where does the final liability stand? Who is the target market? What's the what are the income limits that are on this? What are the supports external to finance supports that are put in place for these vulnerable households to help them manage their finances better and not get into mischief? So all of that sort of detail. It's obviously we're in the pointy end of the campaign, and we'll probably see a few more of these things flying out over the next 5 days ahead of voting. But buyer beware, I say, when you look at some of these policies.